everybody. Welcome to Phyllis the Schlaftershow. I'm Lizz Winstead. My friends and I are dressed. We went in hard to do the after show about Hulu's miniseries, Mrs. America, and we just decided to go full period. Although I'm sort of Phyllis Schlafly and sort of starring in a dinner theater production of Arsenic and Old Lace. But my friends Moji and Molly got it going on, and our special guest, Michelangelo Signorile, we didn't put him through this hell. So please say hello to Molly Gaebe and Moji Alawode-El, and of course, the one and only Michelangelo Signorile, who you know as an incredible journalist, author, and the host of the Michelangelo Signorile Show on Serious Progress XM. I feel really excited about deep diving into this show on a weekly basis because it is about feminism. And then it's also the story, and its main character is based on a woman who led the charge and been instrumental in destroying equal rights for women, for queer people, the whole LGBTQ community, anybody who's just not her. So before we dive into like the meat of the episodics, let's just get into some of the just basic, what do you like? Like, which characters are you totally into? Moji, let's jump off with you. Who do you love?
I loved it. I love Cate Blanchett. She's like my Patronus, and I just find her amazing in all things. And I want her to play me on TV. And I feel like she does an amazing job of taking this unsympathetic character and making her still not sympathetic, but definitely gorgeous to look at and well acted. And then all of the other characters are amazing. I love an all-star ensemble, and everyone, even before it came out, I think I came into the office jumping up and down and doing high kicks. This is going to be fun. And it did not disappoint.
I think it disappointed Molly.
Phyllis does not deserve Cate Blanchett. She's literally the person that we're all like, I want her to play me. But apparently Phyllis gets her, so there's that. She's also a lesbian icon, so I feel like that's subtle shade. I also do love how famously bisexual actress Sarah Paulson is playing her made-up best friend, so I feel that's also subtle shade to Phyllis. Star-studded cast on both sides, and I cannot wait to see Niecy Nash as Flo Kennedy. Such a badass that I think way more people need to know about. I'm so pumped.
Yeah. Michael, how do you feel so far? What do you like?
I love Cate Blanchett as Phyllis. I think she captures that tension between sort of being a powerful woman and wanting power, and then driving a movement that's trying to make sure women don't have any power. It's totally bizarre and hypocritical. And I think she really gets that. She's just amazing. Also, Tracy Ullman is just fabulous as Betty Friedan, and I think the cast is amazing, and it's fun to watch.
Also, the other thing that I really loved about it was the way that it was shot. The world of Phyllis felt like remains of the day. It was shot very slow and very methodical, and it felt very organized, and it made me uncomfortable because I felt like I didn't want to spill in my own home because I would ruin her couch.
Definitely a choice to portray the feminists as drinking, smoking, partying, drug doing, dancing badasses. And I think that's important because a lot of Phyllis's arguments are based around the fact that libbers are actually miserable lesbians who don't have any fun. So just to be showing that side of them, I think is definitely a theme that we're going to see through the entire series.
It was wonderful. And also I wanted to obviously hang out with the feminists because that looked like a lot more fun.
I think so too. Michael, how did you feel about the aesthetic?
I really loved, to that point, that the world, especially of Gloria Steinem, was so glamorous and so fabulous. And, it did cut across this myth or mythology of feminists as sort of just being, these hardworking, constantly angry. I loved all of that, the sense of camaraderie and and the partying. I just thought it was great. The celebration of the movement, even as
Yeah.
they were obviously, fighting against all of these men who were trying to take their power from both Republicans, Democrats, everything. Right.
The reason that it seems so familiar, and I think this is the part of why I'm glad that Hulu is doing the show, is because Phyllis Schlafly shepherded in this crazy paranoia, communist, just deep state conspiracy theory, bald-faced lie with conviction thing. I mean, that was her jam. And Michael, you've interviewed her several times, and I think one of the things, when you're doing a show on Phyllis Schlafly, you can't cover everything. But I think it's important before we deep dive in to talk a little bit about like she wasn't just a housewife who was like, you know what, I've decided I'm gonna have opinions and then I'm gonna destroy the ERA. She got some cred. Talk a little bit about like where she kind of came from and where her power came from.
Well, going back before that whole time of the ERA and before the 70s, I mean, she had come out of the Goldwater movement. She was a real hawk on foreign policy. She also was, and this I think is very important. She was also opposed to Nixon, not just because of his stance on Russia, which is in the film, in the show, but also she was opposed to his position on segregation and busing. And I mean, she was hardcore with the far right of the Republican Party on the issue of race, going way back, before the civil rights movement. And, I think she saw that as something that, just like with abortion, just like with gay rights, they would try to roll back over a period of years, even if they made an accommodation for it for the right now. You know what I mean?
That's who she was. She was just this Goldwater garbage queen who wanted to be in the room with men talking about how we were going to destroy the world, right? And I find it interesting that when there was that scene when she was in his office and she was there thinking that she was going to be talking with them about the terrible nuclear treaty, and they were like, "Sweetie, get us a pen."
Now, our superiority in MIRVs does not compensate for the Russian superiority in ICBMs, SS-9s.
Hey, listen, could you take notes for us? So that we have an unofficial record. Well, you probably have the best penmanship of anyone here.
Oh, yes, of course.
Margaret can grab you a pad.
Okay.
Instead of being like men are garbage, I think I should stand up for myself and get more women in this place. She was like, "Oh, you're not going to let me be here? Then I'm going to start a new club full of women that hate women. See, that's what I'm going to do because I'm awesome." And then she jumps in the ERA.
So it seems clear that she was very smart, right? And I think that she may have assumed or known she was the smartest person in the room and was pissed that like the dudes didn't notice.
She was so all consumed with having power and thought that she foolishly thought somehow she could be a power player within a patriarchal society. And instead of trying to take down patriarchy, she just decided she was going to uphold patriarchy so she could find her power lane, and that power lane was destroying the ERA. She could find her minions there, which I find so fucking awful.
Yeah, that's why this scene was so powerful, because it really condensed into one visual representation, just her swallowing of sexism, which you had to do back in the day. Now we have options. Now we can spit. But that moment, that scene is the same scene where the stenographer calls her Ms. Schlafly, and she basically slaps it out of her mouth and says, "I'm Mrs. Schlafly. I'm married," because that to her is all her power too. Like, you are nothing basically if you are not married, if you're not a Mrs. So just like so many moments in that scene, we see where she begins her journey sort of here and what motivates her.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and her husband is Fred. She's Fred.
Yeah, she is off Fred. I think too, like that scene was pivotal for her because she switched her whole thing to like being, "I'm going to focus on the ERA." And it reminded me when they didn't give George W. Bush the baseball commissioner job, if all they had to do was make him baseball commissioner, or wouldn't have ever had him as president. All they needed to do was let Phyllis Schlafly be at their stupid luncheons about destroying the world, and we would have the ERA.
So true.
We watch her get this sort of light bulb moment of how she's going to destroy other women by being the leader of the woman haters club. And it was great the way it just was like, I'm going to start organizing these women, and then you lead it into the second episode, which is the Gloria episode, and you don't forget that she was not famous, right? She was not somebody who people knew. Where the feminists had people who were leading the way in profound ways. I mean, Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1963, and every woman read it, whether they agreed with it or not. Almost every woman read that book. And Gloria Steinem had started, New York Magazine and Ms. Magazine, and had the expose on Playboy. And you had Bella Abzug, who was, incredible. And so we had superstars, and we had this housewife taking on superstars in the women's movement who were seemingly going to push everything forward. And if you don't know the history, it seems like, how is Phyllis Schlafly going to do this? Molly, how did you feel when you were in the Gloria moment and you were watching them talking about the ERA and being super positive?
Woof. It really reminded me of the opening scenes of the Titanic. When they all have their tickets and they're excited to get on board, and their hats are fabulous, and they're like, how could this ever go wrong? We're the biggest ship in the world. We've got all the momentum. And you just know that iceberg is coming. So it's kind of painful to watch. Spoiler alert for anybody who's watching this show right now. It doesn't go well for the feminists.
It also reminded me of 2016 when three of us were at a presidential election party in our pantsuits, just so excited for how it was going to turn out. And here we are.
You can never think you have won, or it's in the bag, or anything when it comes to equal rights. And, it really captures how far women had come, and how at the time there were more, moderate Republicans, and they really were afraid to go against the women's movement, and how she empowered them to kind of, say, screw that. And the last time I interviewed her was in 2015 at the Conservative Political Action Conference. And the Supreme Court was about to rule on marriage equality. And she had also been very forceful against LGBT rights. And I asked her, I said, well, do you think it's over now? Do you think that the fight is over? And she goes, oh, no. The gays have their inevitability argument, but the feminists said that about abortion, and they got their Roe v. Wade. But look at what we've done in the last 10 years. Victory blindness, this idea that you've arrived and that it's all wonderful and this and that. And I drew back on the feminist movement and the civil rights movement. I mean, all of the movements. And you see that here. You see that sense of, we have it done, but it can all become undone. And what she did was actually help provide a blueprint for the right on a whole bunch of other issues, because this was still in the 70s, but as we got into the 80s, we would see them organize fervently on so many issues. And I think she provided that blueprint. The newsletter, that was their staple. That would become a staple of right-wing activists, getting mailing lists, sending out newsletters, organizing people in that way.
And, the fact that people could do that by snail mail is so incredible. As we talk about the power players in the second episode, I think it's important to, just like Phyllis, where we had to do a little bit of backstory, like, how did you get here? This movement of feminism also had its tomes and stuff, right? You looked at The Feminine Mystique, which Tracy Ullman's character Betty Friedan wrote. She was a powerhouse.
Yeah, I feel like she's one of the big kahunas of feminism. This is basically the textbook of modern feminism, right? She wrote it in It was published in 1963, and it pretty much started the second wave feminist movement, which is where we are in the middle of in Mrs. America. But she wasn't just like a housewife that wrote a book and sort of left it at that. She was super politically organized and a huge activist, as you see in the show. She co-founded and was the president of NOW, the National Organization for Women. She co-founded NARAL, which is still around today. It's a national abortion organization. And with a bunch of other heavy hitters in this show, she founded the National Women's Political Caucus, which was hugely influential. So she had a lot of staying power. She's one of the big ones.
Yeah, and she was with and Bella Abzug, who is known for her hat, and Margot Martindale was incredible as Bella Abzug, and she was this Upper West Side of Manhattan in New York radical. She was a union organizer and a workers' rights organizer and an anti-war activist. They would say with Bella Abzug, if she sponsored a bill, you'd lose 30 votes instantly. But she was also just like on it and trailblazing, not only on women's issues, but on children's issues, on anti-war issues, union issues. And she was a giant trailblazer when it came to gay rights. Right, Mike?
Oh, she was enormous. She introduced the first LGBT rights bill in Congress that included everything, public accommodations, employment, housing. It was incredibly far-reaching, and she, got pretty far with it. And then as the right organized, as we see happening with Phyllis Schlafly in Mrs. America, it just sort of threw everybody on their heels. And by the 90s, the gay rights movement is just trying to get employment protections passed. Now, people are back to, okay, we need to have full civil rights, everything all at once, going back to Bella Abzug's bill. We have the Equality Act.
And I think that Gloria Steinem, who, was, I think, like, she was like 13, 14 years younger than these two. She was like this young, idealistic upstart in this. And, she became the poster child for the movement when these two women had really set the building blocks, and they really introduced a lot of conflict with that, right? Moji, I know that was something that you really loved about it.
They really go into it in the third episode, which we're not going to get into right now. But she famously went undercover as a bunny at the Playboy Mansion to sort of, and she exposed the sexist practices there, which kind of, because of sexism, almost cost her journalism career, or at least sort of temporarily derailed it. But she went on to be a columnist for New York Magazine. She founded Ms. Magazine. And then also, I think what they really capture is that she was also like young and beautiful and smart and funny and cool. Like, she, played by Rose Byrne, she's really very cool. And then she, like, I saw a play about her last year. She's still an activist. She's still a feminist icon. She's iconic.
She's great. In fact, a lot of people don't know about Gloria. She was, there was a show called That Was the Week That Was, which is a British show that came over to America. And she was it was a comedy show, sort of the precursor to Weekend Update, and David Frost was the host. But she was one of the comedy writers on it with Buck Henry. She's an incredibly funny person. And the thing that I liked about this second episode was, while they talked about the ERA, I felt like they were setting up the dynamic of all of these powerful feminists and what their agenda was, and as it comes up against the Democratic Convention, which was coming in, where abortion was going to be placed. And abortion really was centered in this episode. And I think Gloria's abortion, which is a really main focal point of this issue, was really interesting to see, because it was paramount to sort of how she decided to live her life.
You must promise me two things. You will never tell anyone my name, and you will do what you want to do with your life.
It's very powerful because it juxtaposes her having her abortion with her dancing and for her freedom, and then really setting the stage for, I'm going to push forward for what I want. And I thought that was really powerful.
And I like that he was like, live your life. This is like an empowering moment that really touched me.
And we meet Shirley Chisholm. She's like the fourth in this like league of badass women. She's the first Black woman to get elected to Congress, one of the founders of the Congressional Black Caucus, and also just the struggle of, they really set up Shirley Chisholm's struggle, especially when it comes to being surrounded by white feminism. You know, it's like she's dealing with a patriarchal power structure. She's dealing with a white feminist power structure. You know, she's got all these people coming at her as she is trying to move forward as a woman, as a Black woman, you know, as just pushing it all forward. It is, I could watch a whole Hulu show about Shirley Chisholm. Where's that show, please?
I'm really excited. I haven't been able to watch the next episode, which is called Shirley, but it's called Shirley, so it should be kind of exciting.
Feminism had so much problematic shit going on with the dominance of white voices and everything. And I think that they really start laying that out, as well as, you know, when you look at, you know, some of the big takeaways, you know, the biggest thing for me is that sexism plays into that too, where sexism was rampant on both, is always rampant. Like, men are garbage regardless of how they vote. It wasn't all rosy. There wasn't just like perfect liberals who were like super great and super dope on race and super dope on everything. They were not. There's racism within progressivism. You know, there is racism always on the right, whatever. But I think that it was good to see that progressive men they weren't just all like, yay, let's support women. They were being garbage. And you expect it on the right. The men in Phyllis Schlafly's life were utter trash.
Garbage. There's a lot of garbage men in this show. That is a strong through line that came through loud and clear. Especially on the feminist side too, they show how bad it was. In that scene at what should be the flagship building for feminism, which is the Ms. Magazine offices, sexism and chauvinism is still rampant there. The publisher douche, accordingly named Clay, he could have been Chad, whatever. Clay has no qualms about just throwing out this quote to the whole office, directed at Gloria Steinem, of course. He doesn't want to put Shirley Chisholm on the cover because he's an ally. And he says that he gave Gloria a job because she had gams for days.
I gave Gloria her first byline assignment because I saw her standing outside my office one day and I thought she had great legs.
Clay.
What? It's a great story. It's a great story.
He's the money guy.
And what I think is really telling about this scene is that nobody says anything. He just is allowed to say whatever he wants because we do not have that power yet. We're still coming off of the 60s where women were just fuck puppets, right? So we still have a long way to go in terms of, feminism really sinking into the men on our side as well.
Are we there yet?
Yeah. No. We're not there yet. And I feel like that's it. It's like you think you've made strides when you have a magazine that's about feminism, but if it's not funded by women and if there's not a board of directors that are women and you're beholden to men, they get to walk in and they get to swing their fucking wallet dick. When the guy with the money comes in and says shitty things to you, guess what? You have to take it. And hey, guess what? Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. I worked on a show where literally I had to go to dinner with the host of the show and two of his friends who were also like high powered people who had shows. And he was like, Liz, show your abs. Because you have great abs. And I was like, I don't want to show my abs. And he's like, just show up. And I was like, I don't wanna. And we're at dinner. And he's like, no, you should be proud of them. And it's like, what the fuck, man? Like, I think men are fine if you're the head of Spanx, but when you also all of a sudden want to run Goldman Sachs, then you're in their lane and they fucking hate that, right? And I think that's going to really reveal a lot in the next coming episodes. But Jesus Christ, the men in Phyllis Schlafly's life, there was so many choice scenes where men were just the worst in that era.
Yeah, and it's heterosexual men, it's straight men who, there was no out gay man at that time who would be occupying those spaces with them. Gay people were as threatening as women. And on the Phyllis Schlafly side, it was all about, okay, we'll use you the way that we can for our movement and our power. And we'll also, if we can get sex, great, we'll objectify you, but, and see what we can get. On the feminist side, it was still about power. It was about, okay, we understand we have to kind of give you a space, humor you a little bit. But at the end of the day, we know who still retains the power here. So just understand your place. And in a way, it's the same thing, really. It was the same thing on both sides.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really interesting when you think about how so many people, women that came into the feminist movement, came out of the anti-war movement and were disgusted with the way they were treated in the anti-war movement. Just the sexism that was rampant within that movement. You talk about being a fuck puppet. These women were like cooking for these men. It was terrible, when you tried to talk about equality and abortion and reproduction, these woke anti-war men were like, no, I don't think so. And then you look at Phyllis, who was kicked out of the pro-war movement and had to start this anti-feminist campaign. The parallels of that were pretty astounding. And I think in wrapping up sort of the button that of the things that they set up that we'll be seeing in future episodes, I think that they really laid some good foundation on Phyllis Schlafly as being this like profound hypocrite of how she spent her days championing this movement of housewives who love their lives, when she literally, the whole episode has different Black women raising her kids, doing her laundry, cleaning her house, making her food. She's basically just has her career in her house and then acts like she's a champion for people that don't have that kind of privilege.
Well, I feel like you could look at everything she said, right, about the place of the woman and the privileges of a woman, and you just have to put in front of it upper middle class white woman, and then you sort of get where she's coming from. Because I'm like, this is not true for poor housewives. This is not white or Black. This is not true for the women who were in her house, clearly running her house. Like, and it's wild that she's just sort of centered everything about her experience and just universalized it as part of a movement.
One of the big hypocrisies that stands out to me is she repeats a lot that sexism is made up and that she's never been a victim of sexism, when we see clearly that it's a daily occurrence in her life. And the fact that she repeats this phrase that she says that feminists blame sexism for their failures when they just didn't try hard enough, when, a lot of her failures, she wasn't able to be in politics the way that she wanted because in a large part to sexism.
I've never been discriminated against. And I think some women like to blame sexism for their failures instead of admitting they didn't try hard enough.
We see her both experiencing sexism, deflecting sexism, and she seems smart enough to know that it's happening, and then she stands up and says, it's not a thing.
I want to be clear. Phyllis didn't lose her campaign because of sexism. She lost it because she poured all of her money into those brooches.
Drink every time you see a brooch should be the drinking game of the show.
Oh God, she always had brooches. She always had those little jackets, and she always had that perfect hair. And I think that sort of is how she kind of shielded herself as well. She used all of that as a sort of way of, kind of repelling any kind of criticism. She said, I was trying to ask her questions about the gay rights movement, her son, who had just been outed as gay and worked for her. And she kept saying, shoo, get away, go away. I'm really not kidding. That's exactly the wording that she used. And I said, Phyllis, we are never going away. She then spoke to me every time I met her. She gave me an interview. She realized I was never going away and she had to deal with it. And I think that's how you had to deal with her.
So we won't say goodnight to you. We'll say shoo. Shoo away. Shoo away, Michael. Shoo away. Join us next week when our special guest will be the Reverend Irene Monroe, who is going to talk a little bit about that time and place, and her time and place with Shirley Chisholm. So we're very excited to have Reverend Monroe as our guest. So until next time, for Molly, Moji, and me,
Abortion Access Front, fueled by cheap wine and the stench of patriarchy.